Welcome back to our channel. Today, we're diving into a fascinating and somewhat controversial topic: 10 countries where Chinese tourists can no longer visit in 2024. It's like finding out your all-inclusive trip to Sandals is actually to a Sandals-adjacent Motel 6. Only instead of lukewarm margaritas, we're talking about international diplomacy. Now you might be thinking, hold on, can entire countries really just ban tourists from another country? And the answer, shockingly, is pretty much yeah. From geopolitical tensions to tit-for-tat travel restrictions, we'll explore the reasons behind these changes, and trust me, you'll be surprised by just how petty these diplomatic spats can get. Buckle up, because we're about to navigate the complex world of international relations, and as we'll see, it's about as straightforward as navigating a buffet line behind a toddler with a fistful of mashed potatoes. First up, we have the United States of America, a country that prides itself on being a melting pot, or at least it used to be before someone turned up the heat, and now everything's a bit curdled. Recently, due to what can only be described as a diplomatic spat of epic, some might say childish proportions, the US has significantly tightened its entry requirements for Chinese nationals. Now, this isn't an outright ban because that would be rude, and we all know America would never be rude, especially not on the world stage. Instead, it's more like a velvet rope policy where the bouncer is suspiciously eyeing your passport and asking increasingly invasive questions about your extended family tree. The official reasons for these restrictions range from concerns about espionage, because apparently everyone with a selfie stick is a potential double agent these days, to alleged human rights violations, which, let's be honest, is a bit like a toddler criticizing someone else's table manners. The truth is, this travel restriction is just the tip of the iceberg in a much larger geopolitical pissing contest between the two superpowers. It's a tangled web of trade wars, technological competition, and enough finger-pointing to make a kindergarten teacher lose their mind. Next, we travel to India, a land of vibrant culture, delicious food, and apparently, some pretty strict new visa rules for our Chinese friends. While not an outright ban, India has definitely made it clear that Chinese tourists aren't exactly at the top of their guest list right now. This is like that awkward moment when you show up to a party and realize you weren't actually invited, except instead of a backyard barbecue, it's the entire country of India. The reasons behind these visa restrictions? Well, much like a Bollywood movie plot, it's complicated. There's the small matter of a long-standing border dispute between the two countries. And when I say small matter, I mean an issue that has literally led to military skirmishes in the past. Then there's the fact that India's not exactly thrilled about China's cozy relationship with Pakistan. Think of it like a love triangle, but instead of melodramatic text messages, they're exchanging nuclear weapons technology. Add in a dash of economic rivalry, a pinch of suspicion over China's growing influence in the region, and you've got yourself a recipe for a diplomatic standoff that's about as appetizing as a vindaloo curry after a 10-hour flight. Next up, we hop on down to Australia, a land of sunshine, shrimp on the barbie, and apparently, a growing sense of unease about their northern neighbors. In recent years, Australia has made it abundantly clear that they're not exactly rolling out the red carpet for Chinese tourists, or any tourists for that matter, considering their borders have been about as welcoming as a locked pub toilet since the pandemic started. But for Chinese tourists specifically, the welcome mat has been replaced with a sign that reads, "Come back later maybe." The reasons? Well, it's a veritable buffet of geopolitical grievances, ranging from concerns about Chinese influence in Australian politics, which, let's be honest, is a bit rich coming from a country that still lets the Queen tell them what to do, to economic disputes and accusations of espionage. Australia has also been a vocal critic of China's human rights record, which, to be fair, is a bit like a kangaroo criticizing a koala for being slow. They both have their own unique way of moving through the world, even if one is slightly more likely to kick you in the face while doing it. Chapter 4, Canada, about the travel restrictions. Oh, Canada, land of maple syrup, politeness, and apparently a surprising amount of tension with China. You see, beneath that veneer of niceness, Canada has been quietly but firmly implementing policies that make it clear Chinese tourists might want to consider booking their next vacation elsewhere. Now, Canada isn't exactly known for being a geopolitical brawler. They're more like the polite observer in the corner, quietly sipping their maple-infused latte while everyone else argues about who ate the last Timbit. But even Canada has its limits. the recent arrest and detention of a Huawei executive at the behest of the United States really threw a spanner in the works of the Canada-China relationship. It was like throwing a beaver into the gears of a very polite, passive-aggressive machine. The result? A diplomatic deep freeze that has left Chinese tourists out in the cold, wondering if they'll ever get to experience the majestic beauty of a moose in the wild, or the thrill of a double-double at Tim Hortons. Chapter 5. United Kingdom, keeping calm and carrying on, without Chinese tourists. Next, we cross the pond to the United Kingdom, a country with a rich history, a complicated relationship with Europe, and, as it turns out, a growing reluctance to roll out the welcome mat for Chinese tourists. Now, the UK has always prided itself on being a global hub, a place where different cultures come together to, well, mostly complain about the weather and queue politely. But in recent years, the winds of change have been blowing through Westminster, and they smell suspiciously like geopolitical tension. The UK has been increasingly critical of China's human rights record, particularly its actions in Hong Kong. This has, unsurprisingly, put a bit of a damper on the whole special relationship thing they had going on. It's like finding out your favorite pub quiz teammate has been cheating. Suddenly, that shared pitcher of beer doesn't seem so appealing anymore. Add to that concerns about Chinese investment in critical UK infrastructure, because apparently letting a Chinese company build your 5G network is akin to handing them the keys to the kingdom. And you've got yourself a recipe for diplomatic awkwardness that not even a plate of bangers and mash can fix. Chapter 6. Japan, Lost in Translation, and Tourism Revenue. Our next stop takes us to Japan, the land of the rising sun, bullet trains, and a tourism industry that's feeling the pinch of strained relations with China. You see, while Japan and China might share a love of ramen, their shared history is about as harmonious as a karaoke session after one too many sake bombs. The two countries have a long-standing territorial dispute over a group of islands, because apparently there weren't enough islands in the world already. And this little disagreement has a nasty habit of flaring up and causing diplomatic migraines for everyone involved. Add to that the fact that Japan is a close ally of the United States. Remember that whole geopolitical love triangle thing with India? Yeah, it's like that, only with more aircraft carriers, and you've got yourself a situation where Chinese tourists are finding it increasingly difficult to get their fill of sushi and cherry blossoms. The economic impact of this tourism freeze-out is no laughing matter. It's enough to make even the most stoic samurai shed a tear, or at least discreetly dab their eyes with a silk handkerchief. Chapter 7. Next, we travel to Vietnam, a country known for its stunning landscapes, delicious pho, and a history with China that's about as straightforward as navigating a Hanoi motorbike rally during rush hour. On the surface, Vietnam and China might seem like old pals, bound by shared communist ideals and a history of fighting side by side against those pesky imperialists. But scratch beneath the surface, and you'll find a relationship that's more complicated than a bowl of bun cha. You see, Vietnam and China have a bit of a history, and by a bit I mean centuries of conflict, territorial disputes, and enough historical baggage to fill a cargo ship. Think of it like that friend you had in college who ate all your snacks, borrowed your clothes without asking, and then crashed on your couch for a month. You might have shared some good times, but you're not exactly rushing to invite them to your wedding. These days the tension revolves around, you guessed it, the South China Sea, a body of water that's about as peaceful as a mosh pit at a heavy metal concert. China's been busy building artificial islands and claiming sovereignty over vast swaths of the sea, much to the annoyance of Vietnam and, well, pretty much every other country in the region. Hold on to your hats, folks, because we're heading to the Philippines, a country known for its beautiful beaches, friendly people, and a government that's not afraid to stand up to China, even if it means sacrificing a few tourist dollars in the process. Now, the Philippines and China have a history that's about as clear as the water in Manila Bay after a typhoon. There's been trade, there's been cultural exchange, and there's been enough territorial disputes to make even the most seasoned diplomat reach for the antacids. The main bone of contention? You guessed it, the South China Sea. China's claims in the region overlap with those of the Philippines, and let's just say the two countries have very different interpretations of maritime law. Think of it like this: you're at a buffet, and you're about to grab the last spring roll when someone swoops in and snatches it right before your chopsticks can close around it. That's basically China in the South China Sea. Except instead of spring rolls, it's potentially billions of dollars worth of oil and gas reserves. And also, instead of a buffet, it's a geopolitical powder keg. The Philippines, under its previous leadership, took a surprisingly hard line against China's assertiveness, even going so far as to file a case against China at the International Court of Arbitration. And while the Philippines ultimately won that case, which, let's be honest, is like winning a staring contest with a brick wall, China has basically ignored the ruling and continued to do its own thing in the South China Sea. Our next stop takes us to South Korea, a country known for its cutting-edge technology, delicious kimchi, and a relationship with China that's more complicated than a K-drama plot. On the surface, things might seem peachy. China is South Korea's largest trading partner, and South Korean pop culture, from K-pop to K-dramas, is wildly popular in China. It's a match made in economic heaven, right? Well, not so fast. You see, South Korea also happens to be a staunch ally of the United States, and it hosts a certain something that China finds very, very annoying: THAAD, the US Army's Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System. Think of it like a really advanced missile defense system that China sees as a direct threat to its security. The deployment of THAAD in South Korea back in 2017 sent shockwaves through the relationship, prompting China to flex its economic muscles in retaliation. Chinese tourists were suddenly encouraged to boycott South Korea, and Chinese consumers were urged to take their yuan elsewhere. It was like watching a geopolitical game of Jenga where someone just pulled out a really important block. And finally we arrive at our last stop, Taiwan, an island nation that's at the heart of one of the most complex and sensitive geopolitical disputes in the world. You see, Taiwan's status is a bit of a head-scratcher. China claims Taiwan as its own territory, a wayward province that must be brought back into the fold, even if it means using force. Taiwan, on the other hand, sees itself as a sovereign nation, thank you very much. This fundamental disagreement has led to decades of tension and mistrust, with China regularly flexing its military muscles in the Taiwan Strait, and Taiwan doing its best to assert its independence on the world stage. Now, where do Chinese tourists fit into all of this? Well, China has a long history of using tourism as a political tool, tightening the taps when it wants to punish a country, or loosening them when it wants to show its approval. In the case of Taiwan, China has been increasingly reluctant to allow its citizens to visit, seeing it as a way to exert economic pressure and undermine Taiwan's sovereignty. It's like inviting someone to your party and then telling them they can't use the front door. They have to sneak in through the back and pretend they're not there. And there you have it. 10 countries where Chinese tourists aren't exactly being welcomed with open arms in 2024. From diplomatic spats to territorial disputes, the reasons behind these travel restrictions are as varied as the countries themselves. But one thing's for sure. In the tangled web of international relations, tourism is often caught in the crossfire. It's a reminder that even in our increasingly interconnected world, borders still matter, and the movement of people is often dictated by forces far beyond our control. Thanks for watching. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more updates on global travel and geopolitical news. Let us know in the comments which country surprised you the most.